Good afternoon. Welcome back to Camp Meeting. If you have been joining us throughout the day, we are so glad to have you back. If you've missed the morning content, we have had some amazing presentations, some incredible opportunities from Dr. Tom Evans with Living a Spirit-Filled Life, with Dr. Sung Kwan and talking about connecting in the community. This morning has been amazing, but I'm very excited for the content that's coming next. This afternoon, I get to sit down and we're going to have a conversation with Justin Khoe and Kaleb Eisele. They'll be joining me up here in a few minutes. But first, we're going to have video content from them. Their presentations are so significant for this time. And here's why. In the COVID context, for the last 4 months, our churches have been forced to be closed, and it has challenged us as a church to discover new ways to do church, to discover new ways to connect, and to be able to share our message with the world, even when the church doors are closed. And two people that I'm familiar with, that I have become good friends with, that are doing this well right now, are Justin Khoe and Kaleb Eisele. Justin Khoe, of course, has been known as That Christian Vlogger. Right now, he is working on a project called I'm Listening, and including some other consulting projects. They're going to introduce themselves in the video. We're going to take about 20 minutes of content that they have put together to do a teaching. And about 20 minutes from now, we'll come back, sit around the table, deal with your questions, and have a conversation about how social media can be a positive force for good in the church today. So, glad that you're here. Can't wait to experience this content together. Let's roll the video. This is Justin Khoe and Kaleb Eisele.
Hey everyone, welcome to Online Camp Meeting. My name is Justin and this is Kaleb.
Yeah.
And in this session, actually in this two-part session, we're going to be talking about social media strategies. If you in your church are trying to figure out how in the world do we do church online? How do we do all these ministries online? I wasn't trained for this. Is something that we've heard a lot. You're in good hands. We're actually here to be able to walk you through this. If you haven't met us before, this is Kaleb. He runs a ministry called
Humans of Adventism.
And in short, that's like, how would you describe that ministry?
Yeah, so part of my job is to go around and just interview Seventh-day Adventists about their lives. I've interviewed about 500, actually over 500 Seventh-day Adventists, and stories ranging the whole gamut of human experience.
Yeah, and if you happen to be following our conference Facebook page, he's the guy behind the Oregon stories as well. So if you've seen those, this is the man. He's the wizard behind the curtain or whatever it is.
And Justin, what do you do?
So I create multiple YouTube channels, podcasts. I also do some coaching and consulting on the side for churches who are actually wanting to grow their online presence. And in this first presentation, that's exactly what I want to talk about today. We've seen so many of our friends in ministry have to do this hard shift, this like massive about face. I only know how to prepare sermons and Bible studies and build community and share boards and things like that. But edit a video, what in the world? How do I do that?
Yeah.
And to all of our pastor friends out there, we see you. We love you. It's hard work. We get it. We understand it. And so we want to try and work through some ideas and concepts over the next 2 sessions on how we can make your life just a little bit easier and how we can even maybe potentially increase your efficacy when it comes to your online ministry.
Yeah. So I would guess that a lot of people watching right now are hoping to pick up real practical tips, beyond the just do something better.
Yeah.
Just
get a better camera, better microphones, and our live stream's better now.
So, but the struggle is, what if you don't have those ideas, right? If you're the person saying okay, I prepared a sermon, that's my job, right? That's part of my pastoral work is to do this sermon. What do I do with it?
Yeah. And this is such a good question. And maybe you've never thought about it like this before, but churches are perfectly positioned for online ministry. We have a culture where every single week we're expected with new content. People are on the edge of their seats waiting for the new piece of content, and assuming that the content is exceptional, which in most of our churches in this area it is, we want to share it and we want to invite people to consume this piece of content and to experience this journey together. And so churches are actually primed in a way that is so unfair when you compare it to businesses or other nonprofits. They don't have an ecosystem built in place where they're expected to create new content.
Yeah.
And so this is our huge advantage. Pastors out there who are used to writing sermons, like you're in the perfect position to blow your mission out of the water. It's exciting.
Yeah, but so does this mean that instead of creating one sermon, now all of a sudden you have to create 6? You know, you have to do a separate piece of content for each thing throughout the week. You know, does it mean that all of a sudden everybody's job just got a million times harder?
You know, I used to think that that's what it was. And when I would create videos for my YouTube channel, what I would do is every time I'd sit down at the beginning of the week and I think of, okay, what are the ideas that I want to share? What are the questions that I want to answer? And then with every single individual piece of content, I basically started from a blank slate. And what I found was when I did that, I would actually end up burnt out. I'd feel discouraged because it was a lot of work. I felt overwhelmed and I felt like, man, there's no way I could possibly do this. How in the world do these people create 3, 4, 5 pieces of content a week? And we're not even talking about multiple platforms. We're just talking about one platform. So it really very quickly felt like this was something I was completely out of my depth for. And so what I learned along the way is that there's a different way to look at this.
Okay.
Where I could even, like if I'm a pastor, just focus on my one sermon or my one keystone piece of content and still be able to reach people on many platforms in a way that's native and unique to that individual platform, and maybe even learn something along the way. And so what we're talking about here is what I've deemed, and I wrote this down because I wanted to say this correctly because I got it wrong on our first take, was this idea of the reverse content pyramid strategy. It's this idea of taking a single piece of pillar content, like a sermon, like a question and answer, like an interview or a podcast or something like that, and basically creating dozens of pieces of content distributed across multiple different platforms, all for the hope of reaching more people and creating greater relational depth.
So what does that look like?
What it looks like is you go about a lot of what you have been doing already. If you're going to record a sermon, pre-recorded or live stream, great. You're going to still do that. Maybe it looks like considering, well, maybe you invite people to submit questions and you do a question and answer show where you just go live for 20 minutes, you and your co-pastor or maybe a couple of elders or young adult leaders of your church, and you just do an open forum Q&A session for 20 or 30 minutes a week. Maybe it looks like, hey, every week I'm going to sit down with one of the members of my church to interview them, to hear their story, to hear their life story, and all these pieces of content, maybe the sermon aside, the Q&A and the interview really take about 20, 30 minutes of work. You just start the cameras, you have a conversation, and what is shot is shot. And in the sermon, you're already doing that already. So we're not trying to add too much extra work to this. But then the question is well, what do you do with it now?
Yeah.
Because the real obvious answer is, well, post the sermon. Great. That's a great start to go. But what we're seeing is that, you know, our communities, they want to listen to a 20, 30-minute sermon. But if they're new to our community, they may not be interested in that quite so much. So here's what we're suggesting is you shoot your pillar piece of content. That's kind of step 1.
Okay.
Step 2 is create micro content. And then step 3 would be to distribute it among the different platforms.
Okay.
When we talk about the idea of micro content, this is something that you and I are familiar with. When you do an interview with someone, people don't realize this. They just think like you asked one question, they gave you 2 paragraphs, done.
Every time.
But the reality is behind the scenes is how long are you talking to these people?
Yeah, an average of an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours.
Yeah, so it's this pillar piece of content. And what I've seen you doing, and maybe it's because it's a lot of hard work to interview people, to edit it down, but I've started to see you do multiple part stories with the same interview.
Yes.
So you're actually putting in the same amount of work as far as interview is concerned, but now you have a 4, 5, 6, 7 part story that people can get engaged with.
Yeah, we actually went as high as an 11-part story one time, which seemed risky because that's so much content.
What's the fear? That people are like, I'm done with hearing this person's story again? Or
yeah, just that it's too much, that they don't follow the whole thing, that you see 11 pieces and you're like, that's too much time and investment. But, you know, how we did this, to me, as the interviewer, we had this giant block of back and forth text. It was actually all done through messenger communication, right? So I have this giant, 4 pages worth, if I were to print it off, story. And, the person was willing to get some different pictures to go with each piece and all of this. But, I could release a Facebook post that takes you, 40 minutes to read through them.
And chances are people aren't going to read that.
Nobody will read that story. No. But in little pieces, spread out every couple of hours for the next couple of days, what we were able to do is slowly build this momentum where people read the first piece of the story and they're like, that was really good, man. Part 1, okay, there's a part 2 coming. I got to know what happens next. And then, cut that off at kind of a cliffhanger and keep doing that to get through the end of the story. And by the end, there were people like, part 9 of 11. They're like, I can't wait.
I think I actually saw comments. I'm not going to bed until
I
release
read the rest of this story. There were people who stayed up until 4 a.m. their time to read part 11 of this story. And I think this illustrates that just the way that we format something matters so much to people on the internet.
Yeah. It actually makes it more digestible and you actually get more bang for your buck in the sense you did one interview where you could have had one piece of content, but now you did one interview and had 11.
Yeah.
The same thing could happen for a sermon. I think most pastors, when they're initially starting, or at least I know that from when I first started writing my first sermon, it was like introduction, point 1, point 2, point 3, conclusion. There's already minimally 3 pieces of content that you can easily pull from your sermon.
Yeah.
Point 1, what was your point? And how do we, instead of taking a 20 or 30 minute sermon, find a 3 or 4 minute clip that does that first point really, really well, and then post that on Monday. And then point 2 could be posted on Wednesday. Point 3 could be posted on Friday. All 3 of them saying, hey, if you want to see the full sermon, here's the link.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that you're able to take the amount of work that you put in for one piece of content, redistribute it and fan it out so that your church is constantly engaging with people online. And while you're doing that, you're able to point people back to your church's website, their sermon, or fill in the blank. It would be just as easy to do this with a question and answer session as well. Ask your church to send in 20 questions and you do a rapid fire. You're going to try and do, maybe it's ambitious to do 20 questions in 20 minutes, rapid fire. But now you have 20 individual pieces of content that all could live great on Twitter, be great on Instagram, be great on Facebook video. All of that would work exceptionally well. And guess what? You've already done the work in one sitting at one time.
Yeah. How many important points are made in one sermon?
Tons.
A ton.
And we're not only talking about what you could do with video. Like, let's also think about other platforms, other mediums. Like, if there's a sermon here, like one of the things that I would encourage you to do is find someone, maybe it's a young person, maybe it's not, but just to take notes during the sermons and find what are the best tweetable, quotable parts of a sermon. And maybe in one sermon, you got 4 or 5 things that were just concise and beautiful. Maybe you need a little bit of editing so that it fits the platform a little bit better. But now, guess what? Now you have additional content that you could be creating. And so now what happens is the church is not only present just on Saturday morning during the live stream, it's now twice a day, 3 times a day, you're posting something out.
Yeah. So I think the question on a lot of people's minds, even if they're like, well, this is a great idea, I would love to have that, but who does the work?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question to ask. I think that a lot of the work can actually be done during the sermon prep. If you're prepping your sermon and you start to think about, okay, how can this also work well, not just for the one format, but other formats as well? I think that this is the easiest way to start. It's not the only answer, but it's a good way to start. In the same way that hey, I've prepared content for a 30 or 45-minute sermon, but all of a sudden I just got called on Friday morning to go to the local academy and give a 5-minute sermonette. I'm going to take something from there and put it there.
Yeah.
Like, you already have this idea of how to translate your content. If you're thinking, hey, as I'm building out my sermon, what are the best Bible verses that I want to use to illustrate my point? Those could also be little micro blogs. Post the verse and then maybe give 2 or 3 sentences of your thoughts as to why this verse matters. And if you're even going real meta, what are the tweetable, repeatable phrases that you want people to think about as you're talking? I think someone who does this really great, and maybe he does it without even thinking, is Ben Lundquist.
Absolutely.
All the time, whenever I hear him speaking, I'm like, oh, yep, got to write that down, got to tweet that, because that's going to be really good.
Yeah.
And if we start to think in this idea of like, we're not just communicating in this one place, but our communication is most effective when it lives and breathes in a multitude of spaces. And you're just simply thinking, well, what would I tweet from this sermon? You might, before you even preach, already have 10 tweets lined up, and you don't even need anyone to do the work. So that's where I might start. But beyond that, hey, what would it look like? Because young people are wanting to get involved. What if it say, hey, I need your help. You're a really talented, creative individual. Here's the sermon file. How can you help me cut this up in ways that would breathe well and work well on different social media platforms? There's a way to outsource it to other people.
Churches are a library of content that they don't recognize. There's so much that hasn't been documented that is powerful stuff, life-changing stuff that, like we were talking about, one sermon contains many, many touching things. One event, one Q&A that you do. If you catalog those things, that's stuff that can continue giving and continue reaching people for a long period of time. And we're actually in a unique position to empower young people in an authority role, in a leadership role, in a meaningful work in a language that they understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is so exciting. And I think that I remember back when I was in high school, I was kind of, somewhat disinterested in church just because it wasn't something that touched my real life. It wasn't something that I actually had to think about and wrestle through. It was just something that was part of the routine. But I do remember one week in particular where my local church said, hey, we want, to do a whole week-long kind of emphasis with young people. And so what it meant was that we were all participating in different aspects of the service, from the sermons to the music to the different things. And I remember being invited to be part of the music team where every night we were practicing. It changed my relationship to the church.
Sure.
Because it was no longer my parents' thing. It started to slowly become my thing. And I remember my perception of church and my perception of this community radically shifted during that 1 week because, wow, this was something that I had ownership with. This is something that I could lend my creativity and my influence towards. And it was exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can get your community engaging with each other, you're going to be building bonds beyond the Sabbath service. And I think this should have always been the goal, but this gives us space to do that. It doesn't matter if you're stuck in quarantine in your home or late at night on your phone or whatever it is. People from wherever they are have the chance to connect. And it's been a beautiful thing. I know in my church, even with just the live stream service, right? People have, while they're watching, actually come together online to talk about the points that are going on in the sermon, right? In a way that we can't do that. We can't do that in the church building.
Let's be real. Sometimes we're texting each other and getting through each other. Sure. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like, we're able to actually interact live. And I think this is what some churches have stumbled onto this strategy, which I think is a good strategy. Rather than only live streaming their service, they're actually going through what's a premiere strategy.
Yeah.
Where you actually pre-record everything, you edit it together so it looks nice and sounds good, and you balance all the audio levels. You're no longer saying, is this thing on? Like you're dealing with, technical difficulty. Like none of that anymore. You just upload the video and schedule it for a premiere. And now what's happening is that the pastors are able to actually be a part of the conversation as they listen to themselves preach. Yeah. And so pastors for the first time might actually be able to have a Sabbath off.
Yeah. I mean, even just debriefing after the sermon, right? Even if you our church has done a Zoom meeting where people literally have their lunches, like they're eating and talking, but there's a chance to like go over the content that we just heard. There's a debrief. There's a continued conversation where it's not just, I give you information, the end. Yeah. But let's use this as a spark in our community to actually come together.
I think that this can benefit communities in tremendous ways, bring people together in this way. But I also think that one of the hidden upsides is it actually makes our pastors and our teachers and our leaders even better communicators.
Yes.
Because as you're formulating your piece of content, you're thinking, I think this point's going to land. I think that this is really going to translate well. And you're thinking about that ahead of time. And then you put out that micro piece of content and you measure it against the different other micro pieces of content. And you can actually gauge, well, was I accurate in that guess? Did that piece of micro content like perform above average or did it perform below average? Because what this gives you an idea and an insight into is, well, what's truly resonating with my audience?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to preach a sermon and then you go to the back of the church and you shake everyone's hand and you say, thank you, Pastor, that was a great sermon. But okay, cool. But what about it did you like? What did you learn? What challenged you? What really got you thinking? And this is the beauty of micro content, because if you are selective with what you choose to upload, you can literally gauge by the number of shares, how much is it resonating with people? And in turn, when you write the next week's sermon, you could start to think, okay, I saw this theme really resonate with my congregation, with my audience, so much to the extent that it actually reached outside of our circle group. So if I want to empower my church to be able to share content that's going to reach their neighbors, I should probably touch on that theme again, or in a deeper way. And so it won't only benefit the community because they're getting great stuff now. They're able to come together and connect over these things, but also we're getting better at communicating because we're actually able to measure the efficacy of our message.
Yeah. So say that I get it, right? Where I'm like, okay, I've taken my message, I've figured out how to cut it into smaller, meaningful pieces I can use throughout the week in different places. What do I do with it? Where do I put it?
Yeah, so great question. I think what I would start with every church is think about, okay, who are you trying to reach? What demographic are you trying to reach? And then ask the follow-up question, well, what platforms do they use? Do they actually use Pinterest? Is Pinterest the strategy of our church? For many churches, it probably won't be. Maybe it is. I don't know. identify the different platforms that you want. So let's say you meet with your team and you identify where are you currently present on social media. And so you have some people, of course, on Facebook. Some are, of course, on YouTube. Some are, of course, on Twitter, Instagram, fill in the blank. You identify these different platforms. And then you think, okay, what is the ideal upload schedule for many of these platforms? For something like YouTube, once, maybe twice a week is enough.
Yeah.
You don't need to be posting every day. In fact, if you post every day, chances are people are upset with you because you're clogging up their feed.
Yeah.
Something like Instagram. Well, let's say maybe once, maybe twice a day, but not per week, right? There's a greater expectancy that you can post regular content. But on Instagram, there's stories. And so you can post stories every single day. Twitter is probably even more aggressive, 2-3 times a day. Same thing with Facebook. So you want to say, okay, on all these different platforms, how many times are we wanting to produce content in a given week, let's say? And then you mark that out and you say, okay, for this platform, we're doing once a week. For this one, we're doing 2 or 3, and fill in the blank. And from there, I would encourage you to think about buckets of content. What type of content can you create that's easy? Obviously, video works because we're videoing everything. So video is one type of content. Text is another type of content. But then there's a whole bunch of other fun things that you could think about. GIFs and memes and other kinds of things. There's just like silly, goofy, but shareable things. And as silly as it might think, like, should churches create memes? Like, well, do you want to communicate with people? Do you want to reach the zeitgeist? Do you want to reach people with where they're at? Because these are the things that get shared.
Sure.
Is it okay to have a healthy degree of humor when we treat subjects within our own community? Would people be inclined to say, you know what, they seem like cool people because they're funny and they have meaningful content at the same time? Maybe some churches will say no, and that's okay, but maybe some churches will say yes. So what platforms, how frequent, and what buckets of content do you want to create? From there, distribute the workload. Pastor, you're going to be in charge of this part. Elder, you're going to be in charge of this part. Young adult leader, fill in the blank.
Yes.
You're going to be in charge of these pieces. And so every time that a sermon goes live, everyone already knows, okay, after this sermon, I should have 4 or 5 things that I'm ready to suggest as content pieces.
So does this mean that pastors now have to be constantly on their phones or computers?
I would hope not, because I don't think it's healthy for any of us to be constantly on our phones and computers. And I'm largely like looking at us because like our whole life is on our phones, right? I wouldn't want to needlessly invite someone into that type of reality because it does take a toll. But this is the idea, is like many hands make light work. If we're all distributing it well, then that's going to be really, really effective. What if one of the members of your team is actually what you could consider like a social media manager type, where their job isn't necessarily to create content, but simply to gather content? All right, so you're doing all the story pieces. So on Monday, I need you to email me 3 of your stories, and you're doing all the photo pieces. We'll send those over to you. You're doing the memes and the GIFs, and you're doing the whatever. And so they just collect it, and then they schedule it out. And the beautiful thing now is that there are many apps, or maybe even the social media platforms built in itself, like Facebook, have schedulers. So in one block, assuming you have all the pieces, in maybe an hour or 2, you can actually schedule your entire week's worth of content. And then it's on autopilot. No one has to think about it.
I don't want people to miss that. That's an industry secret that's so important, to where, people, you might think somebody is constantly, like they're always online. They've posted at all hours of the day, every single day.
Talk about Ben again. This is someone I think about. It's like, dang, this guy's pumping out a lot of content.
But I think that a lot of people don't realize that you can sit down for 3 or 4 hours on Sunday, and you can schedule out an entire week, 2 week, a month of content, and then let it post itself. Right? I think that's such an important thing, because what you're going to be doing is setting aside a time to put together your social media content schedule, and then you're going to continue doing your life, right?
It doesn't have to be this thing that you're thinking about, man, in total, our church is posting 10 times a day across all of our different platforms. Like, that's a lot of stress. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be done during one day of the week, and then it's just done for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some resources? Say somebody's inspired by this. They're like, okay, I get it. I want to do it. I want to learn more.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of resources that you can look at. There's, for example, I've done a course with sdadata.org, 10 Commandments of Digital Missions. If you're wanting your church to excel on YouTube, which is kind of my area of expertise, there's this free 10-part course there that you can actually check out. Another resource that's actually really, really good is the Center for Online Evangelism. They do an exceptional job. Felicia is a good friend of ours, does a kind of an interview blog and podcast style where they're interviewing some of Adventism's greatest social media influencers, if we can use that word. That's another really healthy resource. And then our other friend, Jamie Domm, just released a book talking about this. And actually, why don't you talk about this because you're in the book?
Yeah. So I am quoted on one page, but it is a step-by-step guide on the ties and the ways that we can go through digital evangelism. These are not separate concepts. The internet and evangelism don't have to be separate, but they can be beautifully joined. And what that looks like from absolute step one to developing some kind of strategy and all of the possibilities that come in that. And that's available, I think, on sdadata.org/book. We'll double check that.
We'll put it right here on the screen over my face. Ready? There you go. That's the right link.
Yeah. But obviously we recommend that. But yeah, there's a lot there that is uniquely suited to these times, especially. And we don't know, honestly. We are living alongside all of you in such an uncertain time. We don't know how long the internet is not just going to be important, but the main, if not the only way that we can do church. Absolutely.
And I think there's a really strong argument that I think many people have already crossed this line. You know what? We've seen the power of the internet now. Even if we could go back to normal, we're not going back to normal.
Yeah.
I was a part of this interview once, just a couple of days ago, and this pastor said, "We ain't going back because back is whack." It's like, all right, there you go. They were seeing the power of what was happening online because their church, on an average weekend only reached maybe 100, 200 people, but now through their internet presence are reaching 1,000 people a week.
And it's engaging young people in a different way. What I have seen, something so beautiful, is that board meetings and things that happened kind of behind closed doors, often someplace that people really didn't get a visual on what that looks like. Now people are much more likely to be involved. It's much easier to be there and present in a Zoom conversation with your church family in the decision-making process than it's been before. And so it's a really exciting opportunity to invite your young people to come alongside you and even to do some reverse discipleship, where they may have something to teach the church.
It's a really exciting time. We're going to stop right here because of time, but we actually have a second part series coming up with this where you're actually going to walk us through one specific type of content, which we would agree is probably the most potent type of content that your church needs to be doing this year.
Absolutely.
We're going to be talking about
storytelling
and how to do that, right?
Absolutely. And we'll be talking big picture about how to affect real life in-person change using the internet.
Because this is what we want. We don't only want to have like 1 million followers. Hey, that'd be cool if our church had 1 million followers. Why not? But really what we're about is the in-person community, building relationships. And what we're here to say is that the internet is not different from what's happening in real life. That in many cases, they actually overlap, if not are the same thing. So we want to talk you through a couple of those points, and we'll see you guys in the next series.
All right, welcome back onto the stage, and I have with me right now Justin Khoe, that Christian vlogger from I'm Listening. Do you still go by that, by the way?
I don't know. There's a clear way to describe it. It's hard, but yes, that Christian vlogger, I'm Listening, Growing Together podcast, The Move, whatever it is. There's a lot of things that we kind of are working with right now.
Justin's here.
There you go.
And I'm so glad that you are. And Kaleb,
I'm also here.
You are here.
Yeah, this is me. Hi.
And I am so glad to be able to follow up on the content that you put together. So I listen to that video and I go through that step and I try and put it in my brain. And I'm a pastor here, okay? I mean, yes, I work at the Oregon Conference. Yes, I am in media here. And yet I listen to this idea of creating a bunch of micro content from my sermons. And even after that, I feel a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us feel overwhelmed when it comes to that. I know that even for myself, when I create one piece of content, an interview or a show that I'm really proud of, a lot of times it feels like, man, I'm done. I want to kick up my feet. And the idea of even engaging with micro content or even doing the engagement through commenting and sharing and all the other things around, it's like, man, this is a lot of work. I don't know if I'm really up for it anymore. So I totally resonate with the feeling.
I wonder if maybe it's just the terminology. In any profession, there is jargon that comes with it. There's terms that can throw you off, and they're really simple ideas. The idea of micro content might sound scary, and yet it is take a long thing and break it into pieces. Make it several smaller things.
So I guess that makes sense. I mean, if I'm prepping a sermon, or if I'm giving devotional to youth or something, I have 2 or 3 points that I probably want to get across that lead to one major event or one major takeaway. So what you're telling me is that each one of those points becomes possibly a part of my micro-content strategy.
Absolutely. And I think that this is maybe it actually makes the goal a little bit more attainable. Think about it in like baseball terms. If you felt like every time you went up to bat, you had to hit a home run, you had to take them from start to finish, you need to baptize them after this one message, like you're going to feel overwhelmed. And so what we're saying is micro-content actually takes the pressure off you. You can actually just hit a single. You can hit a double, and sometimes even with some micro content, you can just completely strike out, and it's okay because you're no longer trying to accomplish everything all at once. And this is kind of what one central piece of content with nothing else around it really looks like as far as strategy-wise for most churches. You got one shot to reach your members, and if for whatever reason the algorithm doesn't work or it just doesn't get shared enough, that whole effort was lost. But with micro content, you're minimizing your risk and you're maximizing your reach.
I don't think it's so different from in person. Just growing up in the church, there are lots of sermons that I felt started strong and then it was the end. Mm-hmm. And I missed all of the important work and points that had been made throughout the sermon. I think what this gives us an opportunity to do is take those, 2 or 3 main points, and each one gets its own starting place. Mm-hmm. Instead of just having to absorb all of it at once, like you're saying, right? Like this video itself seems overwhelming. And yet, if you saw it in 6 pieces, what is micro content? How do I schedule it? What platforms do I use? Each time that you break those things up, the concepts themselves aren't really overwhelming. It's just trying to take in a bunch of new information at once can be.
And I guess that makes sense. I want to go back to something and reiterate something you shared briefly in the video. Okay, so we're talking about micro content. We're talking about these small bites. Most of the churches that I know spend a lot of time making sure that their live stream is solid, so that their whole church service gets out into the world. Okay, what do you see as the challenge with that approach?
Sure. Can you restate, what is the challenge with just live streaming what's there? What is the challenge with having, say, an hour of content or an hour, why don't we just stick with live streaming? Like, my church service is out there, I've done it, yay. So to answer this question, you have to actually put yourself in the seat of the audience, the seat of the viewer, right? When you're at church, people can't get away without being embarrassed.
You literally can't run out of the building without people noticing. There's
a social pressure to stay in your seat until it's done. If somebody gets up and leaves, it's actually kind of offensive, right? Like, I prepared this sermon and you left. But understand that when people watch this, they're going about their day, right? It might be Saturday afternoon, their kids need something, they watch 5 minutes and then they need to feed their kids, or they need to clean up a mess or something. Very rarely is somebody going to go and just sit down directly in front of your content for an hour and do nothing else. A large percent of people who are interacting with content now are exclusively on mobile, which means like they're on their phones watching this. So whether they're in the bathroom, whether it's playing while they're doing dishes like I tend to do, something like that. Imagine that you're that person and you see an hour where you have to commit an hour of your day, or over the next few days, I can commit 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time and get through this whole thing at my own pace. I think that's really what we're getting at here is giving this to people in the way they actually use it.
I think the whole human psychology piece of how we consume content is absolutely crucial, and you're right on. Like, how often do we sit down and we see a video is 2 hours long? We're like, perfect, just what I was looking for. Chances are, you're looking for something under the 10-minute range, and so this is certainly how people consume content. But it's also true that this is actually what the platform itself is looking for. If a lot of people start a video, let's say it's an hour-long or 2-hour-long live stream, and within the first 2 or 3 minutes they sign off, that's a really bad indicator of how this piece of content is being perceived by the audience. If Facebook notices every time that they show your live stream and people people leave within the first 2 minutes out of an hour, they're going to start interpreting that data to say, you know what, this 1 hour piece of content really isn't that good. It's not really serving our audience, and for Facebook's perspective, we're not able to make as much money off of the ads that we could show. So instead of showing this 1 hour thing, we're going to show a 3-minute something from someone else. And so there's, in many platforms, there's a metric that has to do with retention. How long are you keeping people on the platform on this specific piece of content? And just human psychology says, hey, if it's an hour, 2 hours long, only your diehard fans are going to be the ones watching it. Only your dedicated church members, and it might be a great thing for your weekend service or something like that. But how does a piece of content perform on Sunday, on Monday, on Tuesday, on Thursday evening? And so if it's only performing well between the hours of 9 and 12 on Saturday morning, it's not really going to go as far. So what would it look like for us to chop it up? And so that way, when we have a 5-minute clip, people are actually watching 3 or 4 minutes. Now, it might not be a huge shift. Maybe they're still only watching 3 minutes. But now, instead of like a 5% completion rate, now it's in the 60s, 70s, 80% completion. So Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or Twitter, whatever it is saying, hey, this piece of content is more valuable than its larger brother or sister.
So that makes sense. It makes me a little nervous, though, because now I'm seeing that by producing all of this camp meeting content, like we're potentially cratering our Facebook page. Is that what you're saying?
Thankfully, I think most platforms will look at each individual piece as a standalone thing. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much like, man, every time that the Oregon Conference puts something out, just retention goes down. No, they'll treat every individual piece. They're kind of gracious when it comes to that, or maybe selfish, because really what they want is they want more ads. And so if Oregon Conference has a history of creating large pieces of content, but this one short one is working really well, well, they're going to still be incentivized to share your short one. So what's beautiful about this strategy is it's not either or. You don't have to only do a live stream or micro content. In fact, what we're actively suggesting is you do both. You have your long 1 hour, 2 hour live experience on the weekend, because this is still what our church is used to and what is going to serve them well. And in addition to that, throughout the rest of the week, you could also be capitalizing on everything else that we're suggesting here.
You can create paths between the two. Imagine that every Saturday morning I'm a pastor. I'm not a pastor, but imagine that I am.
I'll imagine right here. You're a pastor.
And I preach, and we do our sermon live, and then, say that 25 members watch it, right? Throughout the rest of the week, I can still take that same sermon, and I can take my points and cut them up, and I can redirect. I can say, if you want to watch the full sermon, watch it here, right? So people can be drawn in by maybe my second point is actually the one that's really resonating, right? My first one is lost on my audience, but my second point, wow, people don't even know that was in there, and all of a sudden I'm starting with it, and they're like, what's the context for this? Yeah. They'll go back much more likely and watch the entire sermon to see, what is this guy saying? Like this one particular point really connects with me. Now I want to go back and see the whole thing.
And to start to lead into the next session, I don't want to get too far down that road, but it sounds like, in that sermon, if I tell a story, or if I have an illustration or an experience that really hits home in the pew, then it has this opportunity to hit home online also.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, we're actually saying that, and it's actually a really great relationship between the two. That also what's working online influences what's happening in person. What we were saying in the presentation is you'll see a clear correlation, and sometimes it'll be a correlation that surprises you. There's many times I create a piece of content, I pour my heart and soul into it, and then it does less good than what I was hoping. And there's other times where I'm like, I'm pressed for time. I throw something out there that in my mind, in my heart, I'm not the most proud of, but it actually clicks and it resonates with my audience. And then I get asked the question, well, why was that the case? Because in my mind, I think that this is going to work when something else works. And if you notice that trend and you pay attention to it and you study it, you can find over and over, there are certain things that are connecting with your audience that you didn't think were. And so now as you're sitting down, if you're a pastor, if you're a content creator, you're thinking, well, why did that work? And how can I take the lessons from that and introduce those concepts into tomorrow's sermon?
Yeah, it sure is interesting to see online two people who have never spoken to each other. One finds the story of another and shares it, and then a couple weeks later, I see them in person connecting as friends. There is a direct relation between the information that we take in, the investment that we put into both online and offline content, and our relationships. And really, both Justin and I, our work is based on taking this tool of social media, not using it to, build a big entertainment audience or anything like that, but to use it in a way that directly connects people together.
And even with your experience on these platforms, it sounds like even still, you end up being surprised by the performance of some things.
All the time. We like to pretend like we have everything figured out and everything that we're going to create is always going to be a home run, but we're learning all the time. And I think that this is probably encouraging for many content creators or brand new content creators, aka pastors, to realize, like, you know what? I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still trying to figure out, how does this whole machine work?
Yeah, it's sort of like being a mad scientist, right? Where it's like, oh, we mixed something, nothing happened. We mixed something, it blew up. But this thing worked, and we discovered something, and that's awesome. We wished every single thing that we tried did, but it doesn't. But we keep trying because it's worth doing.
And this is the reason why micro content is so potent, is because if you only have one at-bat per week, well, that cycle of learning and growing and adapting and reaching people, it takes a long time to get there. But if you only have one at-bat compared to 15, 20, 30 pieces of at-bat throughout multiple platforms, I mean, you're going to learn really rapidly.
Yeah.
Certainly. So I want to take a little bit of a turn here.
Sure.
Because we're talking, and I'm looking at who's looking in here. We have pastors, we have worship leaders, we have members, we have all kinds of people. At our camp meeting this week, our theme is I serve. It's not just the pastor who serves. It's not just the church that serves. It's not just somebody out there. It's me too. And when I serve, and when you serve, and when you serve, then we're serving together to impact our society.
Yes.
So let's shift the conversation. Is there a way that this strategy can work for one Christian who cares about their community, who wants to make an impact?
I think that this is the beauty of, this is kind of self-congratulatory, but I think that this is the beauty of Kaleb's story and my story. Neither one of us are pastors.
Yep.
We are the average Joe who just decided, you know what, that thing over there called social media, there's something to it, and we should probably give it a shot. And the good news is that, we were trying and failing and sometimes succeeding and sometimes getting our foot caught in our mouth. But what happened is, over time, with a consistent dedication to this craft, with growth over time, we're able to actually create and craft and cultivate communities that are actually paying attention in some way that, maybe weren't paying attention before we were online.
Yeah, it's easy to look at anybody who has any kind of online audience and think, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Well, no, we have all different roles. And I just want to say that there are a lot of people who don't have an audience that are heavily engaged in serving. There are people who take content like Justin's and I's and spread it and share it to people. There are people who show it in church. I mean, there are a lot of different ways, or even the people who say, look, the internet is not for me, but you know what is for me? You are for me, and I will feed you, or I will help support you. We would not be anywhere even able to do the things we do without so many supportive people just constantly helping us along the way. And that is equally, if not more valuable. The public attention is not what we're after. What any of us should be after is just contributing how you can, where you can, in the best way you can.
Wait, you blasted by that last point really quickly. Okay. So what I think I heard you say is that if I care about reaching my neighbors and I care about reaching the next generation, I don't need to be the next social media star.
No.
I can actually look around for who's doing good work and participate with them in their ministry.
Absolutely.
I think that this is a really great kind of motive check. Why are we creating content online? Is the purpose to create, a kind of this platform where we're celebrated and there's fame and there's notoriety? If so, well, maybe we're not doing it with the purest of intentions, right? I firmly believe that I would still be having the conversations that I'm having. Like if I have an episode of I'm Listening, I'm sitting down with my pagan barber or my atheist friend that I met on the internet. I want to still have those conversations, whether I document them or not. It just so happens that documenting them actually helps create the kind of change I'm wanting to see in the world. But when it's all said and done, if I had no platform, I want to believe that this is still the kind of work that I'm going to be doing. I know that this is true for Kaleb, that Kaleb cares deeply about people. He wants to hear from their stories. He wants to be able to empathize and learn. And even if he didn't have a platform like Humans of Adventism, he'd still be interested in listening to people.
Yeah, this is absolutely an outpouring for both of us. Social media is the tool we chose, but it is an outpouring of the life that we are trying to live. Listening to people, sharing their stories on my end. I mean, this is something, and it's evidenced by the fact that both of us did this for free on top of other things for a long, long time before we ever had the opportunity to partner with the church, to get any kind of income for this. We were already living this way, and the opportunities just happen to present themselves along the way, but we would still be doing it.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's another significant point that you hit on. There isn't necessarily one formula for how social media works. I mean, there is in the science of algorithms and whatnot, but there's not one persona or one way in which ministry happens. What I hear you saying is that you are yourself and yourself pours out online.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to get involved with this, my contribution to the social world is going to look different than Kaleb or Justin.
Absolutely.
But somebody would want to listen to me. I'm not sure that's true, but
We'll put it this way. Every time that you and I get to the privilege of sitting down and having a meal or hanging out together, I'm interested in hearing about your life. I'm interested in hearing about your perspective. I actively engage and I ask you questions because the way that you see the world is unique to the way that I see the world. And so from that little microcosm alone, your perspective matters, and it influences people in a really potent and powerful way. And so to that level, you might not reach Kaleb. I know that you do reach Kaleb, but let's say theoretically, someone like Kaleb might not be interested in your perspective, but someone like me would. And that's the beautiful thing about the internet is that you don't have to reach everybody, but if you reach some people, you're going to be able to create community and relationships and bonds around that.
Look, the church needs individuality. It needs you to not say, I'm going to do exactly what this other person is doing, but I bring my own life experience and my unique talents and interests to the table. There is so much value living in each individual person who's willing to serve. And I think that's a beautiful thing about this church. We don't have to force people to be exactly the same to bring out the absolute best in them and to empower them to work for God.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like your basic action item is just do something.
Yes.
I think that's definitely the first step for sure. and something can be so different. It doesn't have to be do Kaleb's something. It doesn't have to be do Justin's something. But it's so cliche, but it's this whole question that we like to share at the church in the pulpit all the time. What's in your hand? What is the thing that matters most to you? What is the thing that lies nearest to you? Go and do that, and do that well. And God will bless that. It's not so much about what stone you choose to pick up, but it's the fact that you pick up a stone and you decide to use it for God's glory.
So we started talking about pastors.
Mm-hmm.
Let's circle back there a little bit. If there were a pastor who's been inspired by the conversation so far, or a worship leader, or another church leader that is saying, okay, social media is a place where we need to get more involved in. And by the way, I think that if there's anybody that's saying we shouldn't be involved online some way this far into our pandemic, I'm not sure what's happening. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are listening to us that are saying, okay, we need to do something. What would be a legitimate next step they could do, say, in the next week that would get them started on this?
I think first thing that I'd like to say is that both Kaleb and I serve within the Oregon Conference context, within the Pacific Northwest more broadly. And if you're one of the pastors within this territory, don't hesitate to send us an email, to give us a phone call. It is our pleasure, it really is, to be able to work with you and try and talk you through some of these ideas. That's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, if you need kind of some guidance in that area, check out some of the resources that we mentioned in the actual presentation itself. And then even beyond that, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah, I would say another thing you can do is sit down and take a look at your budget. Simple things like paper products. Can you repurpose something to help with digital outreach. And you really don't have to feel like you personally have to be the one to create digital content or to do digital missions. Maybe there's somebody in your congregation that you can empower to do that. I know we have a lot of young creatives out in the church that I mean, this is what they want to do. This is their passion. This is how they want to serve, and they're willing. I included a link to Mentor Marketing. This is somebody that I learned from when it comes to Instagram, because I'm even kind of getting too old to understand like some of the ins and outs of Instagram. So always taking somebody and doing a reverse mentorship where you allow them to teach you, you empower them to serve, and just being intentional about, okay, how do we develop and add this to what's going on?
You might be surprised at how low-hanging the fruit is. You might think, but I'm in a small church, we have no money, there's nothing that we can do. And I don't want to downplay that emotion, that experience, but there's a lot that you can do for just a tiny bit of investment. I was kind of joking with my father when I was visiting him in California somewhat recently. He's like, how much does the floral arrangement at the front of your church, how much does that cost on average? Maybe it's not thousands of dollars, but it's certainly not an insignificant amount of money. And what does it look like to say, you know what, maybe for a test season, we're going to find the paper bulletins, or we're going to find the floral arrangement, which are all really easy decisions right now and during COVID time, because you don't need either one of those right now. But what would it look like to for a moment, take some of our budget out and replace it with digital marketing, consulting, hiring a young creative who's able to help you create all these assets? Because the beautiful thing is we are absolutely not advocating for pastors to do all this work. In fact, we're actually saying, please, pastor, don't do all this work. It will lead to burnout. It's too much work for you to do by yourself. You need to be able to work with people. And especially, I think right now, young people, we've been waiting for this moment. On the creative side of things, so many of us are like, yes, finally, the church is embracing, and we're excited to be able to work with you.
So I love that. So if I'm a local church, I have $50 a month or $100 a month to test out something in the digital world. Where should I spend it?
Yeah, I'll say one thing that I spend upwards of this on is just hiring somebody to do Instagram for me. You know, hiring somebody to do Facebook for me, hiring somebody to do something with what we've got. You know, we talked about taking the video of sermons, right, and cutting that up. There are so many more ideas that you can do with that. You can just have somebody listen and take notes and quotes from the sermon itself, and literally just translate that into images. Right? They just take 2 sentences at a time, some of the most powerful stuff, and just translate it into images each week. And this doesn't have to be super expensive. This can start locally and with someone who probably would volunteer to do it anyway because they love the church and creativity. So
if it wasn't clear, start with your keystone piece of content. For most churches, this is going to be your sermon. Some churches might have a podcast. Some churches might have a live Q&A show or something similar to this. Start with one of those major pieces of content. Go through it and actually listen to your own content for one. That's going to help you a lot. But
that's terrifying, by the way.
It is.
That's really terrifying.
Trust me, I know. I have to edit my own videos every once in a while, and it is terrifying. But whether it's you or your spouse or certain key members of your board or young people who identify people, 2 or 3 peoples who might be able to go through that entire piece and timestamp it. Say, hey, from minute number 3:46 to 5:12, you were just on fire. We need that put out there. And so what you're going to do is, after going through the piece of content once, you're going to have 5, 10, 15, 20 ideas of where you want it to start and where you want it to end. And that'll work well with video pieces of content, quotes and graphics and Bible verses. And so you're going to just simply go through that and then find a young creative. Say, hey, do something interesting with these timestamps. If you don't have a young creative, it's still simple. Go to Fiverr.com and hire someone who's a graphic creator or a graphic design artist or a video editor and say, hey, can you chop these things up and make it work for our church? You'd be surprised what $100 a month could get you.
There's a pattern in my life that I think has been really, really powerful and important, and that is leadership being willing to take a risk on me. And I think locally, conference-wide, whatever level you're at, being willing to take a risk on people, let them fail. You know, truly, you will rebuild. It'll be okay. I've failed many times, but like you are discipling and building somebody when you hand them the keys and say, okay, you actually know about this more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of having to get every single thing approved and just like bogged down in red tape, sometimes the best thing you can do is say, I trust you.
Mm. I think when it comes to the area of social media content, there's a mantra that I try and repeat in my own mind as often as possible, especially for those of us who are starting something brand new. And it's the idea that done is better than perfect. I know that as those of us who lean on the creative side, or those of us who are speakers and content creator types, you want your best foot forward all the time. And I think that this is a great impulse. But sometimes perfectionism gets in the way of the gospel. I think that God himself is not so worried about everything being perfect per se. He works through fallen humanity. He uses us to be able to communicate the gospel. And where we fall short, there's grace. But beyond that, it's the idea of, hey, use something. Because when you use something, God can bless it. If we don't take a step forward, well, then that's when God is kind of proverbially handcuffed.
Yeah.
That's just such good counsel. I mean, so I love that quote. Perfectionism sometimes gets in the way of the gospel, and I think that goes beyond social media, but that's a conversation for another day. So I really have appreciated this conversation. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this all afternoon, but I know that we want to wrap this content up and take a quick break before we come back for our next session. But before we go, I do want to give you a chance to share with people what projects you're working on, where are you at, what are you working on, how can we connect with your ministry, how can we connect with the kinds of stuff that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I have my hands in many different creative projects. I guess what I'm most known for is my own personal YouTube channel. You just simply look up I'm Listening with Justin Khoe. You'll find my new YouTube channel and podcast there. I also run a show called The Move, which is more Bible studies and this kind of teaching with my friend Jonathan Leonardo. I also, with Kaleb, we've actually partnered to create this new show called the Growing Together podcast for churches that are really wanting to thrive and be able to create community where young people feel just empowered and this is the kind of church that they want to be a part of. Like, we have all those pieces together. Kaleb, we also work on some projects together.
Yeah. I guess since this is the Oregon Conference camp meeting, let's start there. I do a lot of social media management for the conference. And if you ever see a post with no name and just a story, and at the bottom it says #OA stories, that is always somebody that I have personally met with, called, talked to, and interviewed about their story. And if you want to see all those, just click on that little hashtag and it'll bring them all up. I run a large storytelling page called Humans of Adventism. It's intentionally not theological. It's just the lives of people who claim the Adventist identity. And then, of course, we collaborate on many, many other projects. And yeah, I would say those are the main places to find us.
Super. Now, you work with many other young creatives. You work with a lot of other people that are excited to have the opportunity to work with churches. Is there anybody else that you want to shout out while we're here?
How much time do we have?
I'm hesitating because I don't want to forget some people. So if those of you watching the playback, if we miss your name, we're apologizing. Like, you're doing great work too. So let's start with someone like Felicia Dottis with the Center for Online Evangelism. Mm-hmm. She runs a podcast called the Digital Missions Podcast, I believe, interviewing people who are out there in the world doing digital missions and doing it well. There's a lot of education you can receive from there. I'd also recommend Jamie Domm, who's with the North American Division, sdadata.org. Also has a lot of teaching blogs and live streams walking people through how do you do Facebook ads, how do you start a blog, how do you do a YouTube ministry, things like that. We also have some friends that we partner with along the way as well.
Yeah. First people that come to mind, I would say people I'm learning from actively. Claudia Allen has, especially this year and the past year, she works with Message Magazine. She is just a great voice to follow on social media that really makes you think. Kendra Arsenal over at Advent Next podcast, stationed up at Andrews University.
I would say Jasper Iturriaga.
Absolutely.
Tell Them Creative Ministries is a fantastic storyteller as well.
Yep. And we've been using our creativity to partner with on the ground, in person, people like Bo Kim of Fusion Ministries in San Bernardino as well. So it's this dynamic partnership all the time. And we could continue with many more names. If you want more names in the comments, just let us know and we'll come on later and just absolutely just flood the comments with recommendations if you need them.
And even if it's not that you're looking for a specific name, if there's a particular problem that you're trying to solve, I'm looking for a video editor, I'm looking for a storyteller, I'm looking for a social media manager, or maybe you don't even know what the right words are. Hey, at my church, this is what I'm doing and I'm struggling with this problem. Yep. We'll help you connect with the right person.
Yeah, and real quick, right here in the Oregon Conference, two women I've been learning from a lot, Heather Moore, Nina Velato, documentary filmmaker, podcaster, just very professional people that you may not see their faces all the time, and yet they're behind some of the most incredible work.
Mm-hmm. What I'm excited about is that here in Oregon, we have some amazing creatives, and the creative community here just seems to be growing among Adventists, and I'm really excited for the future, what's going to happen right here in the Oregon Conference.
We feel so blessed to be here in Oregon, and I agree with you. We are seeing a massive surge and growth and just this new wave of creative ministry that's happening here. And I want to point out that this is not happening on accident. This is actually happening because of our leadership, because of our president, because of your work and the advocacy that you have. And so I want to just encourage people who are out there, whether you're on a local church level or you're hearing this from a conference perspective, this is not something that you have to kind of just cross your fingers and hope that it falls into your lap. Behind the scenes, we've been working towards this type of creative community for the last couple of years, and now we're starting to see the fruits of our labors. And so I just want to encourage anyone who's out there, if this is what you're wanting to see locally, it can happen, and your voice does matter.
Yeah, you're not going to have to dig. If you intentionally go out to develop space for creatives, you will be unleashing the floodgates of people. There are people just waiting to be empowered and to have an opportunity. And they're already doing this for secular companies. They're already doing this for other places. We just need the church to get behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we go into the next session, about half an hour from now, we're going to be shifting gears, and we're going to be moving from content into connection. It seems like over the last 4 months, 4 months ago, people were all excited to do church online and be able to have church in my pajamas, and I can check in with 4 of the best Adventist preachers in America right from my couch and all of this.
My Nana's been saying she's been loving quarantine because instead of going to church once on Sabbath, she gets to go to 4 or 5 churches on Sabbath now.
And it's amazing. And especially months ago, it was really exciting to be able to check into all those things. But it seems like as we go on through this pandemic environment, there begins to be a content fatigue.
Yeah. It's no longer simple enough to just show up and you're going to collect thousands of people. That was certainly the case when online church was kind of novel, but we're seeing this kind of decline in engagement for many churches, but an increase in engagement for certain types of churches doing certain types of content. And so in the next session, we're going to just be talking exactly, what is the type of content that your church needs to be making in 2020?
Absolutely. There's an evergreen principle that we're going to talk about, and that is relationships and storytelling.
Wonderful. So thank you for joining us over the last hour. Thank you for joining us over the last hour online. We're going to be back here in 30 minutes to launch our next session. We're going to talk about relationships and connection in social media. I hope that you will be able to get back. This gives you an opportunity to go get a snack or something, do whatever you need to do. Be back in front of your device 30 minutes from now. We're going to be live again right from this space. Thank you so much for being here for our first part of social media. God bless you. We'll see you in a little while.
See you soon.